And welcome. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Friederike Assandri from the University of Leipzig, and I will speak about a literary device which Xuanying, a Tang Dynasty Taoist, used in his expository commentary to the, no, this does not work, hold on, now. Expository commentary to the Daode Jing issue. The commentary exists as part of two Daozang collections and fragments in Dunhuang manuscripts. We have 4 modern reconstructions, maybe another one that I haven't seen yet, and I have an English translation of this text forthcoming in August. So, for time constraints, I've cut out most of the background info. So just 2 words on twofold mystery teaching. It was popular in early Tang Dynasty, 7th century, especially in Chang'an and in a competitive intellectual environment. So Cheng Xuanying was not just talking to Taoist disciples. He was talking also to Confucians and Buddhist intellectuals. One of the main features is that twofold mystery thinkers integrate originally Buddhist concepts into their interpretation of the Daode Jing. One important concept is, for example, that of the compassionate savior, which is like the Buddhist bodhisattva concept. So I've written much about the why and what of twofold mystery. Today, I look a very small thing at the how did they actually do that. So this presentation is going to be very technical, actually, and very narrow, but I hope it can illustrate an aspect of ongoing processes of what we may call conceptual interaction. So I assume you have all seen the Daode Jing. It consists of 2 scrolls, 81 short chapters, 5,000 words. Overall, these chapters, at least to me, seem more like a collection of very wise sayings rather than like a systematic exposition of philosophy. There's a long history of commentaries to the Laozi in early Tang times. The best known ones were probably the He and the Wang Bi commentary. Cheng Xuanying's commentary shows some very novel features compared to the earlier ones. And I will describe these first on the surface, so to say, and then show you with an example what that does in terms of argumentation. So Cheng Xuanying attempts to make out of the loose collection of 81 short chapters a coherent text. In order to achieve this, he adds structures to the text. So firstly, he divides the 2 scrolls into 3 units each, with 1 chapter as an introduction, the bulk of the other chapters as middle part, and the last chapter of each scroll as the conclusion. You see, he explains that on the right. He explains that explicitly what he does there and why he does that. I'll jump over that for time constraints. This technique of creating divisions and subdivisions was introduced in Buddhist texts, where it is commonly called kepan, kewen. There's a lot of words for it, actually. It seems that the earliest to do that was the Buddhist monk Daoan in the 4th century, who proposed a basic division of scriptures into introduction, main thesis, and conclusion, which is the division that Cheng Xuanying here chooses. We find this Kepan style examples of commentaries, especially often in commentaries of the 6th and 7th centuries. Buddhists, Confucian, and Taoists like Cheng Xuanying used this format. The background of this might well be oral presentation of scriptures. Structuring them makes it much easier to explain, of course. And it seems that the use of Kepan is also closely connected to the issue form of the commentary. So, and now we get to the things. The creating of structure is not limited to the level of scrolls. Cheng also divides each short chapter into further subdivisions. Again, in Buddhist commentaries, this was done, and it makes a lot of sense because Buddhist scriptures were very long. For such a short text as the Daode Jing, it is pretty innovative, actually. And as an annotation practice, it is substantially different from earlier commentaries. I have worked for illustrative purposes with chapter 69 of the Dunhuang manuscript, mainly because that fit on 1 slide. I have marked different parts with different colors. So you have a red, a short heading, picks up the first 2 words of the chapter. Then you have in blue, marked here in blue, a structural comment, which introduces the reason for the particular position of this chapter in the sequence of the other Daode Jing chapters and relates the content to the preceding chapter. And this kind of superimposed structure is, as far as I can see, not related to Kirpan, to this Buddhist technique. The only place where I have seen this is in the Shugua section of the I Ching, actually. If anyone in the audience has any ideas where such a structuring could come from, I'd be very thankful if you let me know. So structuring does not end there. Cheng also creates subdivisions of each chapter. You see here the text of the Daode Jing with the smaller, the interlinear commentary, and his subdivisions. These subdivisions, he summarizes them, the arguments, and presents them as a part of his structural commentary in the front of the actual, of the chapter. I've marked them in different greens. These short summaries are then repeated at the beginning of each subdivision of the Daode Jing lines in regular script, with the interlinear commentary then in smaller script. So very complex structure. As you can see here, he makes 5 layers, basically: a title, a structural commentary in blue. I've marked them in blue, he doesn't do that, of course. Summaries of subdivisions, and then he has the title with the summary of the subdivision, the line of the original text, and the commentary to the line in smaller script. So I've worked with chapter 69 because it fit on the slides. For explaining the argument, I will use chapter 40, which is nice because we've had it this morning already mentioned in several presentations. So chapter 40 is the shortest. Returning is the movement of Tao. Weakness is the function of Tao. All the things in the world are generated from being. Being is generated from non-being. And he starts in blue now. I just read his structural comment. The chapter Returning follows the preceding one because the previous chapter correctly explained that the person who has obtained the one uses Tao modestly and unassumingly. This is why this chapter follows, because it explains how this person comes from the origin and descends to the manifest traces in order to sympathetically respond to the needs of the beings. Then follows his summary of the subdivision titles or summaries. Basically, getting into this chapter, we can divide the meaning into 3 parts. So 3 subdivisions here. The first explains that the sage who returns becomes the same as a common person because he compassionately wants to save the beings. The second part explains that even if the traces of the teaching have many different doctrines, nothing is superior to being soft and weak. The third part explains how the 2 primal forces and the 10,000 images are generated by Tao. So then we get into the subdivisions. They start again with the summary, with the argument first. The first part explains that the sage who returns becomes the same as a common person because he compassionately wants to save the beings. Then comes the line of the original text. Returning is the movement of Tao. And then here comes his interlinear commentary. Returning means coming back. Movement means compassion. The sage who has attained Tao goes even beyond the 3 highest heavenly spheres. But because he is moved by compassion and wants to save the beings, he returns to enter the 3 clarities and the Grand Whale Heaven, and then mixes his manifest traces into the world of being. He preaches according to the opportunities and manifests his traces in response to the needs of the being. This is why the first part of the Daode Jing says going far means returning. So I will jump over the second one for time constraints that talks about the teaching and go straight to the third part. The third part again summarizes first, explains how the 2 primal forces and the 10,000 images are generated by Tao. Lao Tzu's line, all things in the world are generated from being, being is generated from non-being. And the interlinear commentary, being is the responding Tao. It is that which is called the Chi of the original one. The marvelous origin of the original one is what is called the place of dark stillness. It means that heaven, earth, and the 10,000 things are all generated from the responding Tao as a thing that exists. It is precisely so that this responding Tao arises from the marvelous origin. Having its beginning in the marvelous origin, it is precisely ultimate non-being. Now, this is the end of chapter 40. I will show you the beginning of chapter 41. this in blue again, the structural comment to show how this carries on into the next chapter. So the chapter, the person of highest capacities, follows the previous chapter because the preceding chapter explained that the responding Tao is empty and dark. Its origin and traces are both marvelous. Origin and traces refer to the first part of his explanation of chapter 40. Yeah? Therefore, this chapter now follows and explains that the man of higher capacities can realize the Tao, but it is not something that the man of inferior capacities can hear and understand. And then it continues, subdivisions, original text is with the same pattern that goes throughout the whole Lao Tzu. Now, conclusion very shortly, actually. What did he do here? The original Kirpan aimed at summarizing arguments in long Buddhist texts. Xuanying instead, at least as far as I can see, uses the same technique to basically superimpose a line of argument that he personally was interested in. He introduces an explicit subject, the compassionate sage, and his activity of saving the beings. All this is tied then to the original texts by setting the subdivision summaries before the lines of the Lao Tzu, of the original text, and using the interlinear commentary to explain how to read the line of the original text in order to get to the reading that he had presented in the summary of the subdivision. The repetition of this subdivision summary as a title, so he puts that twice, in every chapter it's twice, adds additional strength to this superimposed argument, actually. And then the structural commentary picks up key terms, not from the original Lao Tzu, but from the subdivision summaries, and carries them on in the next chapter. And this strategy allows Xuanying to create a pretty coherent reading of the Daode Jing and making the Daode Jing into a systematic exposition of philosophical ideas which incidentally match competing Buddhist and Confucian ideas of his times, like in our case here, the Bodhisattva concept, which we now have with the correct interpretation in the old text of the Lao Tzu. So thank you very much.